I knew something was wrong the moment the bank manager looked over his glasses at me. His voice was gentle, almost too gentle, as if he already knew a truth I hadn't yet dared to name. I remember how my fingers tightened around my worn leather purse, the one my late husband, Harold, had bought for our 30th anniversary. The room smelled faintly of printer ink and carpet cleaner, yet beneath it all was the sharp scent of betrayal I couldn't quite recognize then. I wasn't always this cautious. There was a time when I trusted too easily, especially when it came to my son, Daniel. He was my miracle baby, born after years of trying and late-night prayers whispered into the darkness. I raised him through Harold's long hours at the mill, through tight winters when the heating bill worried me sick, through the years I took extra mending jobs to pay for his summer camps and school trips. I used to take pride in saying I'd never missed a parent-teacher meeting, not even the one held a week after Harold's funeral. Grief pinned me down back then, but motherhood kept me moving. As the years passed, Daniel grew into an ambitious young man, always carrying a spark in his eyes that I mistook for promise. But somewhere along the line, maybe after his second layoff, maybe after that brief, chaotic marriage he barely spoke about, his requests for help began to stretch longer, feel heavier. At first, it was small things, a phone bill he'd forgotten, a temporary loan for car repairs. Then came the bigger ones, 2 months' rent, a credit card payment he swore he was moments away from paying off. Each time he promised it was the last. Each time I wanted to believe him. I suppose I ignored signs I shouldn't have. The quick way he changed the subject when I mentioned my retirement account. The unusual interest he suddenly took in my mail, especially the statements from Pinewood Savings Bank. The night I found him in my kitchen, rifling through drawers while insisting he was looking for batteries. Little moments that should have meant something, but a mother's hope can be blinding. The morning of the bank incident began with a simple text from Daniel. "Mom, urgent. Need you to go to the bank today. We'll explain later." No explanation came. I remember standing by my window, watching the weak winter sunlight slide across the lawn, telling myself he must be in trouble, that I should go, that a good mother wouldn't hesitate. So I grabbed my coat, tucked my checkbook into my purse, and drove to Pinewood. The lobby was quiet when I walked in, just the soft hum of the printer and the distant beeping from the ATM. The manager, Mr. Lawson, greeted me with the polite smile he always gave older customers. He led me to his office, offered me a small paper cup of water, and sat down across from me with a folder already waiting on his desk. "I understand you're here regarding a withdrawal request," he said. His tone was careful, measured. It made me feel suddenly cold. "I believe so," I answered. "My son said he needed my help." He opened the folder. I saw my name printed across several documents, authorization forms, electronic transfer requests, even a change of address slip I had never filled out. Each one bore a shaky imitation of my signature. My breath caught. For a moment, I couldn't speak. Mr. Lawson tapped the first page gently. "Before we proceed, I need to ask you a very important question," he said. His eyes softened, and when he spoke again, his voice felt heavier, sadder. "Did you sign any of these forms?" The world seemed to tilt. I stared at the papers, at my own forged signature, at the requested amount of $38,500, the money I had saved slowly, faithfully, over 23 years of ironing shirts and sewing hems after Harold passed. That nest egg was my safety, my future, my dignity. No," I whispered. My voice cracked. "I didn't sign any of this." I felt something inside me fracture then. Not a loud break, but a quiet, devastating one. It was the sound of trust thinning to a thread. I blinked hard, trying to steady myself, trying not to imagine Daniel's face as he handed these forged documents across the counter, confident I'd never know. In that moment, shame washed over me. Not his, but mine. Shame that I hadn't seen this coming. Shame that I raised a child who believed he could take from me without asking. Shame that the boy I once rocked to sleep had turned my love into an open wallet. Mr. Lawson folded his hands. "Mrs. Thompson," he said carefully, "I'd like to help you, but I need to confirm the facts. Once we do, we can ensure your account is fully protected." The ache in my chest pulsed like a slow bruise. I nodded, though my hands trembled. I felt as if my entire life had narrowed to that small office, that stack of papers, that one terrible question I had just answered. I didn't know it then, but that moment would become the turning point, the quiet spark that would grow into something steadier, sharper, stronger than fear. For the first time in years, I felt a boundary forming, like a fence rising around the fragile pieces of my life. And though I didn't yet know how, a small voice inside me whispered that I would not allow this to be the end of my story. I barely remember driving home that afternoon. The sky was the color of dull pewter, and every bare tree I passed looked like it was pointing at me, asking why I had let things get this far. When I pulled into my driveway, the porch light flickered the way it always did when the wind picked up. Harold had meant to fix it before he passed, and I'd never had the heart to change it. Funny how grief lingers in the smallest, most stubborn details of a house. Inside, the quiet felt heavier than usual. I set my purse down on the kitchen table, next to a stack of utility bills I'd been meaning to go through. The gas company had sent another reminder. They always printed "Final Notice" in bright red letters, as if shouting at me would make winter any less expensive. I traced my finger along the envelope, grounding myself, reminding myself that I still had control of my own life, even if my heart felt unsteady. Daniel didn't call that day, or the next, but he texted, short and defensive. "Mom, did you go to the bank? I need that money ASAP. You're making things harder." No explanation, no apology, just expectation, as if I were an ATM with sentimental value. I stared at the message for a long time. There was a time when Daniel would come to me with stories about the kids who bullied him in middle school, or the science project he ruined by spilling orange soda on the circuit board. Back then, his voice had been soft, uncertain, always looking to me for reassurance. I used to sit with him on the couch, patching together broken cardboard models and broken confidence at the same time. Those were the days when I believed love alone could guide a child safely into adulthood. But adulthood had taken him somewhere I couldn't follow. 2 days after the meeting with the bank manager, I went through my file cabinet, the old metal one in the corner of my laundry room. It had Harold's neat handwriting on the folders. Taxes, insurance, house repairs, savings. I hadn't opened some of those folders in years. My hands hesitated on the savings tab. Inside were statements, receipts from repairs I'd skipped lunches to pay for, little notes Harold used to leave reminding me about interest rates. Seeing his handwriting again made my throat tighten. It also made me realize how much I had let slip. Somewhere in my grief, in my loneliness, in my desire to stay connected to Daniel, I had stopped guarding the things Harold and I had worked so hard to build. I found myself checking the front door twice that night, making sure it was locked. I even slid the deadbolt into place, something I rarely bothered with. Paranoia wasn't something I was used to, but the forged papers had planted a seed, one that whispered unsafe, unsafe, unsafe. When Daniel finally called 3 days later, I let it ring twice before answering. My voice shook only slightly. Mom, he said, sounding annoyed rather than concerned. Why isn't the transfer showing up? Mr. Lawson said he talked to you. Did you tell him something? I felt myself swallow hard. I told him the truth. A tense silence followed, the kind that reveals more than words. I could hear traffic in the background. Maybe he was outside his apartment. Maybe he didn't have one anymore. I didn't know. He didn't tell me things like that. You're overreacting, he said sharply. I just needed a little help. You always make things dramatic. My hand tightened around the phone. This wasn't help, Daniel. Forging my signature isn't help. He exhaled loudly, the way he used to when he was a teenager caught in a lie. You're being ridiculous. Look, I'll come by tonight and we'll sort it out. But something inside me shifted then, like a slow, deliberate click of a lock. No, I said quietly. Don't come by tonight. Not until I understand why you did this. Another silence, this one colder. I needed it, he muttered. Why is that so hard for you to get? Because you're my son, I thought. Because you don't see me anymore. Because somewhere along the way, I became a resource instead of a mother. I'm done talking for now, I said softly, more to myself than to him. We'll speak another time. I hung up before he could argue. My hand trembled, but there was something steady beneath the fear, something almost like resolve. I stood there in my living room, the ticking of the wall clock filling the quiet, and realized I had crossed a line inside myself. The world didn't feel safer yet, but for the first time in a long time, I felt the faintest echo of strength returning, like a long-forgotten muscle awakening. The next morning, I woke before dawn, heart restless, mind circling the same question like a moth around a porch light. How long had Daniel been planning this? I lay in bed listening to the old radiator knocking through the walls, a sound that had comforted me for decades. But that morning, it felt like a reminder. Steady, persistent, impossible to ignore. Something in my life needed fixing, and it wasn't the heating system. I made coffee before the sun rose, the kitchen dim except for the glow of the microwave clock. I sat at the table with Harold's old mug, the one with the chipped rim, and flipped through the stack of envelopes I'd neglected. Water bill, phone bill, a reminder from my insurance company to update beneficiary information. All those little pieces of adulthood we carry quietly, until someone tries to take them from us. As I sorted through everything, a thought pushed through the fog. Maybe this wasn't the first time. Maybe Daniel had tested my boundaries long before the forged papers. The idea stung. I rubbed my temples, trying to fight the ache building behind my eyes. When my phone buzzed, I startled. A message from Daniel lit up the screen. We need to talk. Today. I didn't reply. Instead, I opened the browser on my laptop and logged into my online banking account, something I rarely did. My hands trembled slightly as I typed. When the dashboard loaded, a strange chill climbed my spine. There, in the activity log, were 2 attempted login alerts from last week, times when I knew I hadn't been anywhere near a computer. My pulse quickened. Camera footage, access logs, verification codes. Suddenly, all the small, dull systems of modern life mattered more than ever. I clicked through every notification, every timestamp, every detail that proved the truth I didn't want to accept. Someone had been trying to breach my accounts, and I didn't need Sherlock Holmes to guess who. I leaned back in my chair and stared at the ceiling. The hurt rose in me like a tide, slow, suffocating. Have you ever felt something like this? That moment when love and disappointment twist together until you can't tell where one ends and the other begins? I pressed my palm against my chest, as though steadying myself against my own heartbeat. Later, that morning, I drove to Pinewood Savings Bank again. The parking lot was quiet, just a scattering of cars belonging to early customers. A woman in a green coat hurried out holding a stack of deposit slips, the cold wind tugging at her scarf. Life went on for everyone else, but for me, everything felt suspended. Mr. Lawson greeted me in the lobby. "Mrs. Thompson," he said softly, "I wondered if you might come back." His tone was careful, the way people speak when they suspect you're carrying something heavy. We stepped into his office again, the same smell of printer ink, the same folder on the desk. "I checked my online account," I said. "There were attempted logins, not from me." He nodded gravely. "I'm not surprised." A knot tightened in my stomach. What do I need to do?" He leaned forward. "I can place enhanced security on your accounts immediately, but if unauthorized access continues, you may need to file a formal report." The word report hung in the air like a threat and a promise at the same time. I stared down at my hands. "My son, he says he just needed help." Mr. Lawson didn't interrupt. He let the silence do its work. Finally, I whispered, "I don't want to believe he'd go this far." "Sometimes," he said gently, "people make choices we never imagined they would." He handed me a printed copy of the forged authorization form. Seeing it again, my name written in someone else's careless imitation, felt like reopening a wound. "There's something else," Mr. Lawson added. "When your son brought this in, he seemed insistent. He said you were forgetful, that you asked him to handle your accounts now." My head snapped up. "Forgetful?" He nodded slowly. "He implied you might be struggling to manage things." The room swayed. For a moment, I couldn't speak. I felt as though Daniel had reached inside me and rearranged my memories, turning kindness into weakness, stability into frailty. The betrayal wasn't just financial. It was personal, insidious, aimed at the very core of my autonomy. I closed my eyes, forcing the air back into my lungs. Did you ever realize too late that you were being used? When I opened them again, something had shifted. The fog of confusion, the guilt, the excuses, they began to clear, revealing a quiet, solid truth. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This wasn't a mistake. This was a line being crossed, and I was done pretending not to see it. I straightened my spine. "Put every extra security measure you have on my accounts." Mr. Lawson nodded without hesitation. As he typed, I watched his fingers move across the keyboard, fast and sure. It struck me then. The world wasn't built to protect old women. But there were tools, rules, procedures, and I could use them. I wasn't helpless. I wasn't fragile. I wasn't disappearing. When I left the bank, the wind hit my face like a cold truth, sharp enough to wake me fully. I pulled my coat tighter. For the first time in a very long time, I felt the faint beginning of a plan forming. Nothing sharp yet, nothing final, but a seed of resolve pushing through the cracks of my fear. That evening, I found myself standing in the middle of my living room, staring at the framed photographs lining the mantel. Daniel at 6, missing his front teeth. Daniel at 10, holding the blue ribbon he won in the county science fair. Daniel at 18, cap crooked, grinning at graduation. I touched the frame lightly, tracing the image of the boy he used to be. It felt like touching a memory that belonged to someone else. The quiet of the house pressed in on me. I'd always thought silence was peaceful, but that night it was heavy. I turned on the lamp beside Harold's old recliner, and its warm glow spilled across the room. I sat down, hands folded, trying to steady my thoughts. For years I had let guilt steer me. Guilt for not being able to give Daniel a sibling. Guilt for the long shifts I worked when he was young. Guilt for not saving more, not doing more, not being more. But guilt, I realize now, can be a leash. My phone buzzed from the coffee table. Another message from Daniel. "If you're going to the bank again, don't say anything stupid." This is all a misunderstanding. Just call me. I didn't respond. Instead, I turned the phone face down, feeling a strange calm settle over me. Avoidance had kept me small for too long. Silence had been my shield and my prison. But that morning at the bank had ignited something that refused to shrink again. I stood and went to my roll-top desk. Inside were neatly stacked folders, the ones Harold used to maintain meticulously. I pulled out the one labeled House Legal and sifted through old repair warranties, appliance receipts, and the original mortgage documents. Harmless papers, yet holding an unexpected kind of power. Proof, record, history. Things that couldn't be twisted into some story about my forgetfulness. As I set the papers aside, I noticed something else tucked into the back of the drawer. My old home insurance policy booklet. I remembered renewing it after Harold died, sitting at the kitchen table with a young agent who kept calling me ma'am, as if it were an apology. It struck me then that I had never shown Daniel any of this. He had no idea what protections I had, what records existed, what safeguards were already in place. A ripple of something like strength moved through me. I spent the next hour reviewing everything. Bank statements, old tax returns, letters from my pension fund. I wrote down dates, amounts, contacts, not as a defense, but as preparation. I felt almost methodical, like I was stitching together the frayed edges of my life. Halfway through organizing, I heard a sudden knock at the front door. 3 sharp raps. My breath caught. I peeked through the side window. Daniel stood on the porch. Shoulders hunched, eyes darting around like he didn't want the neighbors to see him. My stomach dropped. I cracked the door only a few inches. "You should have called before coming," I said quietly. His expression tightened. "Mom, this is ridiculous. Let me in." "No," I answered, not unkindly. "Not tonight." He blinked, surprised, maybe even insulted. "I'm your son. And I love you," I said. "But love doesn't mean ignoring what's happened." He scoffed. "You're overreacting. You always do this. One little mix-up, and suddenly I'm some villain in your head." A cold ache spread in my chest. "This wasn't little." He shifted on his feet, frustration flaring in his eyes. "Just give me the paperwork from the bank, and I'll straighten it out. I know what I'm doing." "No," I repeated softly. "Why are you acting like this?" he demanded. I steadied my breath. "Because I finally see what I should have seen years ago." His jaw tightened. "Fine," he muttered. "Have it your way." He turned and walked down the porch steps. For a moment, I thought he might look back, might soften, might say something that reminded me of the boy who used to fall asleep on my shoulder during thunderstorms. He didn't. When his car pulled away, the porch light flickered again, casting odd shadows across the quiet yard. I closed the door, locked it slowly, and leaned against it with my eyes closed. Inside the house, the papers on the desk waited for me. Silent, steady companions in this new certainty. I walked back to them, gathering them into a neat pile. I didn't know exactly what steps I would take next, but I knew this much. I would not be bullied, I would not be manipulated, and I would not let anyone, child or not, rewrite my story or erase my voice. As I turned off the lamp and headed toward my bedroom, I paused in the hallway. The ticking of the clock seemed louder, almost like it was urging me forward. For the first time in a long while, I didn't feel afraid of the next day. I felt ready for it. The next morning, sunlight crept through the blinds in thin, hesitant lines, as if unsure whether it was welcome. I sat at the edge of my bed for a long time, listening to birds outside and the soft creak of the house settling. For years, I had begun my days with small routines, folding blankets, opening curtains, making oatmeal. But that morning felt different, as though my life had shifted a few inches to the left, no longer lining up with the familiar grooves of habit. I made tea instead of coffee, something calming to keep my hands steady. As the kettle hissed, I caught my reflection in the kitchen window, a woman in her late 60s with silver hair pulled back loosely, eyes tired, but clearer than they'd been in a long while. There was a new steadiness in the way I lifted my chin, a quiet kind of backbone I hadn't used in years. After breakfast, I called my neighbor Joanne to ask if she knew a good attorney for elder financial matters. She hesitated at first. Joanne was always careful not to pry. But when she heard the strain in my voice, she gave me the name of a local lawyer, a woman named Evelyn Grant. She helped my sister with some estate issues last year, Joanne said gently. She's patient, and she listens. Listening, what a gift that had become. I dialed Evelyn's office, half expecting to lose my nerve before someone picked up, but the receptionist answered, brisk and warm, and offered me an appointment that afternoon. I accepted before doubt could creep back in. The rest of the morning passed in small tasks, checking mail, wiping the countertops, folding laundry. But everything felt sharper now, each action reinforcing that I was preparing, gathering myself, not hiding. When I opened the electric bill, instead of pushing it aside, I studied it, noting the charges. I wanted every part of my life to be in order again, no loose threads Daniel could pull at. Before leaving for the lawyer's office, I packed a folder with the forged documents Mr. Lawson had shown me, along with printed bank statements, login alerts, even the text messages Daniel had sent. My hands shook only once, when I slipped Harold's old notepad into the folder for support, its pages filled with his neat handwriting. I wanted to feel him near me just a little. The law office was small, tucked between a florist shop and a dry cleaner. Inside, soft classical music played, and the faint scent of lavender drifted from a diffuser in the corner. When Evelyn stepped into the waiting area to greet me, she had kind eyes and carried a legal pad under her arm. "Mrs. Thompson? I'm glad you came in. Please, follow me." Her office was modest but organized, shelves of binders, a framed certificate on the wall, and a small bowl of peppermint candies on her desk. She motioned for me to sit. "What brings you to see me today?" she asked. I took a breath. My son tried to access my savings without my permission. Evelyn didn't flinch, didn't give me that sympathetic head tilt people sometimes offer when they think you're fragile. Instead, she nodded with a calm seriousness that steadied me. "Tell me what happened," she said. So I did. Slowly at first, then with more clarity. I told her about the forged signatures, the attempted logins, the phone calls, the pressure. I didn't cry, though my voice wavered once when I mentioned how Daniel had claimed I was forgetful. Evelyn listened without interrupting. When I finished, she opened the folder I handed her and studied the documents carefully. "This is significant," she said, "and I want you to know something. None of this is your fault. Financial exploitation often begins with emotional leverage. You acted out of trust, not weakness." Her words landed gently but firmly, like stones placed in the foundation of something new. She explained the protections available to me, securing my accounts, documenting the forgery, and formally notifying the bank of unauthorized attempts. She said I could file an official affidavit to prevent anyone, family or not, from making changes to my accounts without direct verification. It was all legal, clean, and grounded in procedure. "Will this get him in trouble?" I asked quietly. "It doesn't have to, unless he continues," she replied. "Right now, we're simply protecting you. You have every right to set boundaries." Boundaries. Such a simple word for something I had struggled with for decades. When the appointment ended, Evelyn handed me a packet containing forms and instructions, as well as her card. "Call me if anything new happens," she said. "You don't have to face this alone." Walking back to my car, I felt the wind tug at my coat, cool and refreshing, like the world reminding me I still belonged in it. I sat in the driver's seat for a moment, hands on the wheel, breathing deeply. On the drive home, I realized something important. I wasn't seeking revenge. Not yet. What I wanted, what I needed, was to reclaim the space Daniel had chipped away at, to stand in my own life again without fear or apology. That evening, I placed the legal packet beside the stack of household documents I'd organized. The house was quiet again, but it no longer felt heavy. It felt poised, as if everything in my life was shifting into alignment, preparing me for the moment when I would have to stand not as a mother trying to protect her child, but as a woman protecting herself. And for the first time, I knew I could. The next few days unfolded with a strange mix of routine and tension, like living inside a quiet drumbeat. I still did all the familiar things, swept the porch, watered the plants, checked the mail. But every task seemed to hum with new awareness. I wasn't drifting through my days anymore. I was watching, listening, taking note of what belonged to me and what I refused to lose. Daniel didn't contact me again. Not a call, not a message. That silence used to frighten me. Now it told me exactly what I needed to know. People who fear consequences often retreat into the shadows. One morning, while brewing coffee, I found myself staring out the kitchen window at the old maple tree Harold planted the year Daniel was born. That tree had weathered storms, droughts, brutal winters. Its branches had lost limbs, yet each spring it found a way to grow again. I touched the windowsill gently. Growth after damage. Maybe that was a lesson I needed now. But even growth requires truth. Late that afternoon, I received a call from Pinewood Savings Bank. The number appeared on my caller ID, and for a moment, my pulse quickened. When I answered, it was Mr. Lawson's calm, steady voice. "Mrs. Thompson, I wanted to alert you to something," he said. "Someone attempted to access your online account again this morning. The security measures we put in place prevented it." I closed my eyes, steadying myself. Was it from the same device as before? "Yes," he replied. "Given the circumstances, I recommend you consider filing the affidavit your attorney mentioned. It will formalize the protections." My throat tightened. "Thank you for letting me know." After hanging up, I sat in the living room, the silence thick again. Not heavy this time, just full of decisions waiting to be made. I pulled the legal packet toward me and reread the instructions. Each page was clear and methodical, outlining what I needed to do to protect my autonomy. But another thought pressed forward, sharp and painful. Why was my own son pushing me to this point? Have you ever felt something like this? That moment when a single person forces you to choose between love and self-preservation? I wish I could tell you, the choice feels noble or empowering. It doesn't. It feels like grief wearing a new mask. Still, I filled in the affidavit. Slowly, carefully, signing my name with the same signature Daniel had tried to mimic. When I finished, I held the paper in my hands and felt both older and stronger than I had the day before. The next morning, I took the affidavit to the bank in person. The lobby was bustling, phones ringing, customers chatting, printers spitting out receipts. The everydayness of it all steadied me. I wasn't stepping into a battlefield. I was stepping into a place designed to document truth. Mr. Lawson met me at his office door. "Mrs. Thompson," he said with that same gentle gravity, "I'm glad you came." I handed him the signed affidavit. As he read it, his expression shifted into the kind of professional resolve that tells you someone is firmly on your side. "This will allow us to place full protections on all your accounts. Any attempted changes will be blocked unless we verify directly with you." He made a few notes on his computer, scanned the document, and added it to my file. Then he looked up at me. "I also want you to know," he said. "The individual who came in previously, your son, asked about your accounts again yesterday. We told him nothing could be discussed without your direct presence or consent." My breath slowed. "How did he react?" Mr. Lawson hesitated. "He seemed frustrated, but he left quickly." The image pierced me. Daniel standing there, angry, impatient, pushing for access to something that wasn't his, something he had no right to touch. I nodded. "Thank you for protecting my privacy." "That's our job," he said. "But I also admire your courage, Mrs. Thompson. These situations are never easy." Courage. The word felt foreign in my mouth, but warm, like something I might grow into. Leaving the bank, I walked more slowly than usual. The sun was bright, but the air was cool, and for a moment, I simply stood on the sidewalk, letting a sense of certainty settle into me. I wasn't afraid of Daniel anymore. Sad, yes. Deeply so, but not afraid. That evening, I organized the rest of my documents: insurance policies, pension statements, tax returns, storing everything in a new fireproof lockbox I'd purchased earlier that day. I even placed a small USB drive inside it, containing scanned copies of every important record. A small act, maybe, but something about it made me feel protected in a way I hadn't felt in years. Just before bed, I found myself sitting on the edge of the couch, staring again at Daniel's photos on the mantel. But this time, the ache in my chest wasn't all sorrow. There was also clarity. Did you ever realize too late that someone was using your kindness as currency? I whispered that question to the quiet room, not expecting an answer, just letting it settle. I turned off the lamp, the soft click echoing gently through the house when I walked toward my bedroom with steady steps. Sometimes strength doesn't come with thunder. Sometimes it comes quietly, carried in the hands of an aging woman, holding her own name with newfound certainty. The morning after I filed the affidavit, the world felt different. Cleaner somehow, as if the air itself had finally decided to stand on my side. I brewed coffee and opened the kitchen blinds, letting sunlight pour across the table where my newly organized documents sat in neat stacks. Each folder felt like armor. Each signature felt like reclaiming a piece of myself. I thought Daniel might show up again, but he didn't. Instead, life slipped back into small routines. A trip to the post office, a slow walk to stretch my legs, a conversation with Joanne over the fence about her tomatoes refusing to sprout this year. Ordinary moments, grounding moments. Still, a faint tension hummed beneath everything, like a violin string drawn too tight. That afternoon, as I walked up my driveway carrying a small bag of groceries, I spotted an unfamiliar vehicle parked across the street. A silver sedan, windows tinted, engine running. My pulse quickened, but before imagination could twist itself into something frightening, the driver stepped out. He wasn't Daniel. He was a man in a navy jacket, with the Pinewood Savings Bank logo embroidered on the chest. He crossed the street with a measured professional gait, stopping at the foot of my driveway. "Mrs. Thompson?" he asked politely. I nodded slowly, clutching the grocery bag a little tighter. "My name is Officer Reed," he said, showing his badge. "The bank contacted our department regarding potential attempted fraud on your account. I wanted to speak with you directly to confirm a few details." A soft chill slid down my spine. I hadn't expected law enforcement, at least not yet, but something in his calm, respectful tone steadied me. "Of course," I said. "Would you like to come inside?" He shook his head. "We can talk right here if you're comfortable." I set the groceries down on the porch step. "Yes, I'm fine." He pulled a small notebook from his jacket and glanced at his notes. We received a report from your bank manager about forged documents presented in your name. Can you confirm that you did not authorize any transfers or sign any of the forms submitted? I can confirm that, I said. I never asked for any withdrawals. And you recognize the name of the individual who attempted to access your account? I paused. The moment felt strangely ceremonial, like stepping across a threshold. Yes, I said quietly. My son. Officer Reed didn't react with judgment or surprise, just a somber nod. Financial exploitation within families is more common than most people think. You're doing the right thing by documenting this early. He asked a few more questions. Dates, times, whether I felt threatened, whether Daniel knew my passwords. Everything was factual, clean, procedural. It felt nothing like the emotional storm swirling beneath my ribs. But the formality of it anchored me. We're noting this as an informational report for now, he explained. Not a criminal complaint, unless you choose otherwise. Thank you, I murmured, and I meant it. He handed me a card. If there are further attempts, or if your son comes to your house in a way that makes you uncomfortable, call us immediately. You're not alone in this. After he left, I stood on the porch for a long moment, watching the silver sedan turn the corner and disappear. The quiet that followed was a different kind from the one that had haunted me in recent weeks. This one felt purposeful. Inside, I put away the groceries, but found myself moving slowly, lost in thought. I replayed Officer Reed's questions, Mr. Lawson's concern, Evelyn's steady guidance. All these people, strangers really, standing between me and the chaos my son had tried to pull me into. It was humbling and heartbreaking. Later that evening, as the sun dipped low and cast long golden streaks across my living room floor, I finally allowed myself to sit down and breathe. Really breathe. I rested my hands in my lap and felt the weight of the past week settle gently around me, no longer crushing, just present. I realized then that this was no longer just about protecting my savings. It was about reclaiming the parts of myself I had given away too easily. My time, my peace, my dignity. Daniel hadn't taken those things. Not entirely, but he had shaken them loose. Now it was up to me to gather them back. After dinner, I stepped outside to water the front garden. The hose hummed softly, and the soil darkened beneath the stream. Fireflies began to blink in the yard, tiny sparks against the dusk. I remembered when Daniel used to chase them, cupping them in his hands and begging me to let him keep one in a jar. For a moment, grief pressed against me, a longing for a version of him that no longer existed. Then I whispered into the quiet, not in anger, but in acceptance. I'm stronger than you ever knew. The garden glowed faintly in the fading light, and for the first time in a long while, I felt a sense of quiet triumph settle into my bones. Whatever came next, I wasn't the same woman I had been, and I would never be again. A few days later, I found myself waking with a clarity I hadn't felt in years. It wasn't the sharp kind that comes from adrenaline or fear. It was quieter, steadier, like a soft morning light filling a room without asking permission. I sat at the edge of my bed, toes brushing the cool floorboards, and realized I wasn't bracing for anything anymore. I wasn't waiting for the next text, the next excuse, the next wave of guilt. It was the first morning in weeks that Daniel didn't occupy my thoughts before anything else did. I made breakfast, scrambled eggs, toast with a bit of honey, and ate slowly, savoring the stillness. Afterward, I gathered my outgoing mail and headed to the post office. As I drove, I noticed details I'd been too distracted to register lately. The bright marigolds blooming outside Mrs. Peterson's fence. The faded yard sale this Saturday sign taped to a lamppost. the familiar hum of the town waking up. Life had continued all around me, even when I had felt trapped in a storm. At the post office, the clerk, young, polite, with a shy smile, helped me send copies of the affidavit and security documents to my attorney. He asked, "Anything else you need today, ma'am?" And for the first time in a while, the answer was simple. "No, that's all," I said. And it really was. When I stepped outside, the air carried the scent of freshly cut grass. I took the long way home, choosing streets I hadn't driven down in ages. I even stopped by the local market, lingering over the produce section, picking out apples one by one like I used to. It felt like rediscovering small pieces of myself that had gone quiet. Back home, I found a letter had arrived from the bank, an official confirmation of the protections placed on my accounts. The language was formal, full of phrases like identity safeguard protocols and access authorization limitations. But beneath the bureaucratic tone, I felt something powerful. Closure. Daniel couldn't touch my future anymore. As I set the letter aside, a sudden knocking startled me. It wasn't frantic or aggressive, just firm, rhythmic, polite. I opened the door to find Joanne standing there with a pot of hydrangeas in her hands. "These were on sale," she said cheerfully, "and I know you've been sprucing up the yard. Thought they might brighten your porch." I blinked, surprised by the warmth of her gesture. Joanne had always been kind, but I'd never let myself lean on her much. I'd spent years convinced that needing anyone was a weakness, but maybe I'd been wrong. "Thank you," I said, meaning it more than she probably realized. "They're beautiful." She stepped closer, lowering her voice. "I don't know what's going on with Daniel. You didn't tell me, and you don't have to. But I want you to know, you're not alone. If you ever need someone to call, day or night, I live 30 feet away." Her sincerity caught me off guard, and something softened in my chest. I nodded, unable to form words for a moment. She gave my arm a gentle squeeze and headed back across the lawn, leaving me with the flowers and a feeling I hadn't expected. Connection. Later, after planting the hydrangeas by the porch steps, I sat on the small wooden bench Harold built decades ago. The evening breeze rustled through the maple tree, carrying the faint scent of earth and early summer. I realized then that so much of my fear these past weeks had stemmed from the belief that everything rested solely on my shoulders, that if I faltered, everything would collapse. But standing up for myself hadn't made my world smaller. It had opened space for new strength, new support, new clarity. As the sun dipped toward the horizon, casting the yard in warm gold, my phone buzzed. A single text from Daniel. "We need to fix this. I'm coming tomorrow." I stared at the words for a long moment, not with dread this time, but with a deep, calm certainty. I didn't reply. I didn't need to, because fixing things no longer meant bending, apologizing, or giving in. Fixing things meant standing firm. And for the first time in years, I trusted myself to do exactly that. I placed the phone beside me, folded my hands in my lap, and watched the sky shift from gold to amber. No fear, no guilt, just the quiet beginnings of the life I was slowly reclaiming. The night before Daniel said he was coming, I barely slept. Not out of fear, those tremors had long since receded, but because my mind felt like a room someone had finally switched the light on in. Everything that once looked like confusion had shape now. Edges, definition, truth. I watched the digital clock blink from 2:59 to 3:00 p.m. and thought about all the times I had jolted awake over the years, convinced Daniel needed something from me. A ride, rent money, help with a bill, comfort after a breakup. I used to answer every call, even at impossible hours. That was what mothers did, I'd told myself. They carried their children's weight, even when it bent their own backs. But somewhere along the way, Daniel stopped calling because he needed help. He started calling because he needed control. Morning came slowly, the sky pale and washed out. I made oatmeal, fed the birds outside, sorted yesterday's mail. Everything felt deliberate, as if I were laying stones for a path I'd soon have to walk. By noon, I had cleaned the living room twice, then forced myself to stop. Busy hands were a temptation, a way to outrun thoughts I should sit with. So instead, I settled into Harold's old recliner and took a long, steadying breath. At 1:14 p.m., Daniel's car pulled into my driveway. He didn't get out right away. He sat behind the wheel, tapping his fingers on the steering column, eyes narrowed as though studying the house for signs of resistance. When he finally stepped out, he walked with quick, impatient steps, the way he used to when he came home after a night of drinking in his 20s, moving fast so he wouldn't have to think. I opened the door before he knocked. "Mom?" he said, eyebrows raised as if expecting me to apologize for keeping him waiting. "Daniel," I replied, keeping my voice gentle but firm. "Come in if you want to talk." He walked past me without hesitation, his eyes sweeping the room as if searching for something out of place. There was tension in his shoulders, sharp and restless. He didn't sit. Instead, he stood in the middle of the living room, arms crossed. "We need to straighten out this mess with the bank," he said. "Mr. Lawson made it sound like you told them I forged things. That's insane." "Is it?" I asked quietly. He scowled. "You know I'd never steal from you." But he didn't look at me when he said it. I moved slowly, sitting down and letting the quiet stretch between us. Silence, I had learned, reveals things words often hide. "Daniel," I said softly, "why did you tell the bank I was forgetful?" He stiffened. "Because they were questioning me. I had to explain why I was handling things. You're getting older, Mom." I thought. "No," I interrupted gently. "You didn't think I was forgetful. You hoped they would." His mouth opened, then closed, then opened again. "Why would I want that?" "So you'd have access to my accounts without having to ask me." His cheeks flushed, and for a moment, he looked like the boy who used to get caught sneaking cookies before dinner. But this wasn't about cookies, and he wasn't a boy. "Mom, I'm drowning," he said suddenly, voice cracking with forced urgency. "I lost my job again. My car needs repairs. I'm behind on rent. I didn't know what else to do." "And you didn't think to talk to me?" I asked. He threw his hands up. "Every time I talk to you, you act like I'm some disappointment." I shook my head slowly. "No, Daniel. I treat you like a grown man. You react like a child." He stepped closer, frustration pulling harsh lines across his face. "I'm your family. Isn't that supposed to mean something?" "It does," I said. "But family is not a free pass to take what isn't yours." His eyes darted toward the roll-top desk. "You have the documents in there, right? Just give them to me. I'll fix this." "No," I answered simply. The word hung in the air between us, small, delicate, and powerful. Daniel inhaled sharply. "You've never said no to me before." "I should have," I replied. "Years ago." He opened his mouth to argue, but something stopped him. Maybe it was the steadiness in my voice. Maybe it was the realization that the ground beneath him was no longer soft. "I'm your son," he repeated, but this time it sounded more like a plea than a threat. "And I'm your mother," I said. "Not your savings account, not your escape plan, not your shield from consequences you created." For a moment, he looked utterly lost, eyes shifting, hands fidgeting, breath uneven. But then a flash of anger crossed his face. "So that's it?" he snapped. You're cutting me off? I'm drawing a boundary, I said. What you do with it is up to you. He paced the room, running his hands through his hair, muttering under his breath. Unbelievable. After everything I've done for you, I raised an eyebrow. Everything you've done for me? He stopped. The room fell silent again. It was astonishing, really, how still a space could become when truth filled it. I stood slowly. My legs felt steady beneath me as I reached for the folder on the table, the one containing copies of the forged documents, the login attempts, the affidavit. I didn't hand it to him. Instead, I placed it on the mantel, a quiet symbol of the difference between us now. These stay with me, I said. Daniel stared at the folder, then at me. Something unreadable flickered in his expression. Fear, anger, shame, maybe all three. Finally, he exhaled sharply. If you want to ruin everything, fine, he said. But when things fall apart for you, don't expect me to come running. I met his eyes with a softness he didn't expect. Daniel, you stopped running to me a long time ago. The words seemed to strike him harder than any accusation. His jaw clenched. Without another word, he strode to the door, yanked it open, and slammed it behind him hard enough to rattle the walls. The house shook. The silence afterward didn't. I stood in the entryway for a long time, listening to the bodent sound of his car disappearing down the street. Then, slowly, I closed the door, locked it, and pressed my palm against the wood. My breath came out shaky at first, then steadier. It didn't feel like losing a son. It felt like reclaiming myself. In the hours that followed, I walked through the house touching small things. A framed photo, a ceramic bowl, a stack of folded linens, ordinary objects that belonged to me, grounded me, anchored me. Later, I brewed tea and sat by the window, watching the last light of day spill across the yard. It glowed softly on the new hydrangeas Joanne had given me, their petals opening to the world without hesitation. I whispered into the quiet, not with sorrow this time, but with a kind of bittersweet gratitude. I'm finally free. No thunder, no applause. Just a woman in her late 60s, alone in her living room, breathing a long, overdue breath of her own life back into her own lungs. And though I didn't yet know what the next chapter would look like, I knew this much. It would be mine. The weeks after Daniel slammed my door felt strangely spacious, as if someone had taken a house crammed with old boxes and finally cleared a path through the middle. For the first few days, I kept expecting the phone to ring, for him to show up again furious or apologetic or both. But the house stayed quiet. My phone stayed still. At first, that silence ached. Then, slowly, it began to feel like peace. I started waking up without that knot of dread sitting in my stomach. The mornings belonged to me again. I'd shuffle into the kitchen, open the blinds, and let the light spill across my table, catching on the rim of Harold's old coffee mug and the little salt shaker shaped like a chicken that I'd bought at a yard sale 30 years ago. Tiny, ordinary pieces of my life, suddenly visible again. One morning, I pulled out a notebook and wrote down every automatic payment coming out of my bank account. Utilities, insurance, the little donation I make every month to the animal shelter. I logged into each portal, me, not someone else, and set fresh passwords, carefully handwritten in a small address book I kept locked in the new fireproof box. It might sound dull, but I can't tell you how good it felt to understand every bill with my name on it, every line item, every date. Control, I learned, isn't loud. It's quiet and organized and patient. About a week after Daniel's last visit, I had a follow-up appointment with Evelyn, my attorney. I brought the same folder I'd shown her before, except this time it held additional records. The bank's confirmation letters, the report number Officer Reed had given me, even a printed log of my recent account activity. Her office smelled faintly of coffee and printer toner. She greeted me with that same calm smile and motioned for me to sit. "How have you been?" she asked. "Better than I thought I would be," I answered honestly. She went through the documents, nodding as she read. "You've done a very thorough job, Mrs. Thompson. Everything looks secure. Your son has no legal path to access your accounts without your explicit consent now. And if he tried to challenge that, the paper trail would work in your favor." Her words settled into me like a warm blanket. I realized then that this was what my revenge really looked like. Not shouting, not courtroom drama, not anyone being hauled away in handcuffs. It was this: a calm woman in her late 60s, sitting across from a lawyer with every piece of evidence lined up like well-behaved soldiers. "He hasn't come back," I said. "He sent one message a few days ago, just, 'You'll regret this.'" I didn't reply. Evelyn's expression softened. "You don't owe him a response." "I know," I said. And I did. Really, truly did. "Do you want to pursue anything further?" she asked. I thought about it, about pressing charges, about escalating, about every possible outcome. But what I felt down in the deepest part of myself wasn't the need to see him punished. It was the need to keep him out of the part of my life he'd tried to invade. "No," I said slowly. "Not unless he tries again. Right now, I just want my peace." Evelyn nodded. "Then you have it, legally, financially, and on the record." It was such a simple sentence, but it was one of the most powerful I'd ever heard spoken aloud about me. You have your peace. On my way home, I stopped at a small cafe near the courthouse. A place I'd passed 100 times and never gone into. It had big windows, mismatched chairs, and a chalkboard menu with smudged writing. I ordered a cup of tea and a slice of lemon cake and sat by the window watching people walk by. Couples arguing quietly, a mother pushing a stroller, a young man in a suit talking too fast into his phone. Life. Messy, noisy, strange life, and there I was. Part of it, not hiding from any of it. Have you ever sat alone in a public place and realized you weren't lonely, just present? It's a small miracle, that feeling. Not long after, Joanne insisted I come with her to the community center for a quilting group. I almost said no. Old habits, staying home, staying small, staying quiet, are stubborn. But she kept nudging, and one Tuesday afternoon I found myself walking into a bright room that smelled of coffee and fabric softener. Women my age and older sat around folding tables, their hands busy with needles and thread, their mouths busy with stories. They talked about grandchildren, recipes, surgeries, and old movies. No one asked me for money. No one hinted for favors. They just pulled out an extra chair, handed me a square of fabric, and asked, "So, Elaine, how do you like your tea?" I learned their names slowly. Margaret, with her loud laugh. Doris, who always wore bangles. Anita, who had a habit of humming under her breath while she worked. They showed me how to piece patterns together, how to line up seams, how to iron the backs so everything lay smooth. There was something about pressing warm fabric under an iron, watching it flatten and behave, that felt like a metaphor too on the nose to ignore. I liked it anyway. Weeks turned into a soft rhythm. Bank statements arrived and matched exactly what I expected. I met Officer Reed once more briefly at a town safety seminar about scams targeting older adults. He gave a short talk, explaining red flags, urging people to trust their instincts. When he saw me in the audience, he gave the smallest nod of recognition. Not pity, respect. After the seminar, a woman with a cane came up to me and said, "My nephew borrowed my credit card and never paid me back. I thought it was just me being foolish." Her eyes were wet. Hearing all this, it makes me feel less stupid. I squeezed her hand. You weren't stupid, I told her. You were loving. Sometimes people don't know the difference between love and permission. Her shoulders sagged in that way people do when a truth they've been carrying alone is finally spoken out loud. Little by little, my days filled with small joys. A library book I couldn't put down, a Saturday morning farmer's market where I bought fresh strawberries and chatted with the vendor about the weather. Long phone calls with an old friend from high school I'd reconnected with on social media, someone who remembered the girl I had once been and was delighted to meet the woman I'd become. Once, on a quiet evening, I sat on my porch with a cup of tea and watched the sun sink behind the maple tree. Fireflies appeared, blinking patiently in the twilight. My phone lay beside me on the small side table, screen dark. I realized, with a kind of gentle surprise, that I didn't dread it lighting up anymore. Did you ever notice how, when the pressure lifts, you suddenly hear sounds you'd forgotten? Crickets, distant laughter, your own breathing, calm and even. Daniel did reach out again months later. A short message. I'm getting help. I'm sorry. I know I went too far. I read it 3 times. My first instinct was the old one. To rush in, to forgive everything, to patch him up like I used to patch broken toys and broken hearts. But I didn't answer right away. I waited. I talked to Evelyn. I talked to Joanne. I sat quietly with my own heart and asked what it needed. In the end, I wrote back one simple message. I'm glad you're getting help. I'm keeping my boundaries. I wish you well. No accusations, no promises, just a clear line drawn with love and firmness. He didn't reply. Maybe one day he will. Maybe he won't. But for the first time, my peace no longer depends on which choice he makes. My revenge, if you want to call it that, was never about destroying him. It was about refusing to let him destroy the part of me that still believed I was allowed to have a life of my own. I used contracts and affidavits and bank protocols, yes. I used passwords and paper trails and calm discussions with authority figures. But underneath all of that, what I really used was something far more powerful. I used the quiet decision to value myself, even if my own child didn't. These days, my life is not extraordinary from the outside. I still clip coupons. I still grumble when the electric bill comes in higher than I'd like. I still forget where I put my reading glasses at least twice a week. I go to quilting on Tuesdays and the farmer's market on Saturdays, and sometimes I meet Joanne at the diner, where we split a piece of pie and share stories that make us laugh so hard the waiter shakes his head at us. But when I walk into the bank now, they greet me by name. Mr. Lawson always steps out of his office to say hello. Once, he said quietly, "It's good to see you looking so well, Mrs. Thompson." And I realized I was. I don't know what the future holds with Daniel. Maybe there will be a day when he knocks on my door not with demands, but with humility. Maybe we'll sit in this living room again and talk about what happened without me feeling small or guilty or afraid. If that day comes, I'll be here. Not as a woman whose life can be rewritten with a forged signature, but as someone who knows exactly where her lines are drawn. And if that day never comes, I will still be here. Because revenge, for me, turned out not to be about seeing him fall. It was about watching myself finally stand. Thank you for sitting with me through this story, for walking with me through the fear, the anger, and the quiet rebuilding that came after. If my journey meant something to you, I'd be grateful if you showed it. By liking this, subscribing so we can share more moments like this, and leaving a comment to tell me what touched you most. And tell me honestly, from your own heart, if you were in my place, what would you have done?